So Titus writes, what are your thoughts on this hot take so far since the announcement of the new jobs and other things that just dropped for Final Fantasy XIV? So hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Brian. If you happen to be new around here, for the returning subscribers, thank you so much for coming in and coming back and checking out this reaction video. This is going to be a long one and I'm going to give you guys my thoughts. I'm going to assume, having not seen what these videos are about, this is Asmon reacting to a content creator who is frustrated or who has left Final Fantasy XIV, and I think I have a lot of experience in both of those topics. So y'all seem to be curious about it, so I figured we'd sit down and react to Asmon. He's reacted to me numerous times, and I think that is only fair, I guess, to say. So we're going to dive in, and I'm going to give you guys my thoughts along the way. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, check out the top link in the description for my Instagram challenge. Fellow comedians have challenged me to grow to Instagram, get my Instagram following over 1,000 this year, and thanks to y'all's support, we're coming up on 200. So it's going to be a slow process. Hopefully you guys, if you use Instagram, you check out that, as it's apparently a comic playground, or at least a tool that a lot of us use. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive into the video.
The downfall of Final Fantasy XIV. This has been a video that has come out. A lot of people have been very opinionated about this and very angry. Who made this?
All right, so a lot of people have been opinionated and angry. I don't see any other solution, especially with a title like The Downfall of Final Fantasy XIV. I would think that those that are angry are obviously taking two sides of it, that the video is absolutely spot on and correct, or that how dare somebody critique and criticize my Final Fantasy in this case. But we'll see.
An individual named Lynx Camelli.
Oh,
hello,
yeah, Lynx.
Everyone. I was Lynx Camelli.
I was. Oh, he deleted his character.
For the first time in recorded history,
damn, bro, he just deletes his character.
Final Fantasy XIV is currently going through a bit of a rocky.
I like that reaction from Asmon. Final Fantasy XIV going through a rocky place. Endwalker, I think, was, no matter what, always going to have those challenges, because one of the driving factors. Like, if you think of it as a pillar of what Final Fantasy XIV is, it's the story, and concluding said story brought in several risks. And I think a lot of people who were continuing to play, maybe beyond the past, beyond the aspect of Burnout, end up feeling, like that story having concluded is a perfect time to step away. But that's where I think everybody obsesses over these numbers, and it doesn't ever really matter. If you're having fun with the game, that's awesome. If you're not, like Yoshi P encourages you to step away. But I think from the content creator perspective, that's always going to be a risk that's running. Notwithstanding that my critiques for Final Fantasy XIV still stand, I understand as a developer myself that those two things are going to be very difficult to reconcile, if impossible to reconcile. But if you guys are curious, you can always go check out my previous critiques and rants about the game itself. We'll just leave it at that.
Period. Ooh. Although I no longer play the game, I loved FF14 like no other game I had ever played. I've put in over 12,000 hours in the 6 years that I've played, and I've seen the game.
That's too much time. Oh man, that's too much time. This is a kind of a case where nobody hates the game more than the people who love the game. In this case,
transform over time from a highly creative niche substitute for World of Warcraft to an unrecognizable mess of oversimplification and lack of creativity. Damn. The opinions and ideas I will present in this video are feelings I have had for a very long time, much before I stopped playing the game, but I never felt comfortable sharing these feelings because FF14 has a critical issue. You. Or more appropriately, the FF14 community. It's no secret that a large amount of 14 players are die-hard lovers that will not accept any criticism or negativity towards their perfect game.
So what's interesting, obviously, about that is Rook is such a joy. And she also plays multiple games. I think that's a huge help. Obviously, I don't think that clip was like targeting at her, but I do agree with the idea that there's this like a police, I've called it the defense force, it's kind of a cult, where it's you kind of have that mindset. Now what's interesting about this is that, like, if you look at it over time, there's not many veterans that are a part of that defense force, that cult mindset. because they eventually come to the same realizations that a lot of people make. And these aren't negative against Final Fantasy. This is just negative against the theme park design model. It's a very successful model that attracts a lot of people because it's very easy to get into, but it's difficult to hold on to those people. And the question ends up being is, do you need to hold on to those people in the first place? Could you just, shouldn't they just be free to be able to go and play and then come back? And that's the business model that is the evolution of where the current MMO stands. That's why something like PAX Day, which I just pushed a video out on that the other day, goes into that sandbox style, which for me as a Final Fantasy XI veteran, like that is where I look at the MMO specifically as something that's very different from what's on the market today. And the fact is that while we all use the term MMO, sandbox and theme park, I think are wildly different genres. And we know that, theme park is wildly successful monetarily, which makes sense from a business perspective, because kid you not, these games are about making money. The whole reason for them existing is so that you can make the company money. Whereas in a sandbox, I think a lot of people, it's a harder entry point, and thus it ends up being a smaller base community. But I'd love to be proven wrong with a super AAA feature complete, highly, engaging sandbox, because I think that's something that a lot of people are craving. People assume Ashes of Creation could be that. We'll see.
Whenever someone brings up a problem they have with the game, they have to keep adding disclaimers that everything is fine out of fear of invoking the wrath of the FF lovers.
This is such a waste of potential, because this dungeon could probably be badass, but instead they're going to make it brain dead easy to cater to casuals, and that's fine. That's fine. A vast majority of their content is so that anybody can do it. And while that's good, and I'm not saying that they should take it away, they need to add some stuff that is a little harder, that not everybody can do it. I'm not saying they need to,
However,
so what is hard content? This is some of the biggest negative pushback that I received when I retired from Final Fantasy 14. A lot of people are like, oh, you just don't do the ultimates and you're not into that. I was like, what's hard content? Like, what is hard? And this is just my developer brain, where I don't think of things as hard or easy. I think of them all as just functions of time. How much time am I willing to invest in a piece of content? And that is usually easily transferred and discussed as the concept of difficulty. But when you start to factor in the idea of time as opposed to challenge, where a lot of people, I think, lean into difficulty, it all ends up for me always being like, my time is better spent doing other things. That's one part of the content creator brain, where, working on the controller guides for the game for so long. But then the other side of it is that, am I having fun in this kind of time? Is it fun to organize groups of other adults to try and accomplish these things? And I don't find a lot of fun in doing that at this time in my life as somebody who's managing 6 children, and so much more, right? I got a lot of things moving on. So in terms of a function of time, I end up gravitating towards more, XP grinds, things like that. And as soon as the XP dries up in any game, I start to get frustrated. You can see any of my frustrations at any game I play. As soon as that level cap is reached and there's no, just extra, XP leveling that you can kind of chase after. In this case, Final Fantasy XI had the merit system. And again, I want to, and with the announcements that they just dropped from EU FanFest, like, I'm hoping that we can continue to see, them invest in Final Fantasy XI. I don't know if they will, but Final Fantasy XI coming into Final Fantasy 14 with the echoes of Vana'diel Alliance Raid is interesting, but the expectations are this is just going to be another Alliance Raid series with that hit of nostalgia. But we've already seen Final Fantasy XI crossovers with 14 in the past, so I'm wondering if this will be able to expand on that. All that being said, fascinating stuff, but I don't necessarily think, I think a lot of people were, when Xeno's talking about more difficult content, like, that's going to mean something different for everybody, right? Like, Eureka, in my mind, was difficult content. That's the content that I want them to make. That's what I really wish they'd make more of the game like that, as opposed to how it is so soft and so, afraid of challenging the player, because they know challenging the player, especially early on in ARR, is just another invitation for that player to leave the game.
Community sentiment seems to be declining for the first time in ever. I mean, Zepla, FF14's beat.
No, it's cyclical. Like Zepla's process and her trajectory has been foretold. Like you could go back and be like, and listen, it's like, this is exactly what the trajectory is for somebody coming in and having lots of content and eventually realizing like, okay, well, there's no real investment. So it's just like eating sugar all the time. At some point, your body's going to go like, hey, there's a problem here. And sure, it feels good right away. It gives you that burst of energy, but then there's no substance to that. And there's nothing wrong with having sugar, right? But when you start to factor this in with the long-term investment, that's where it gets to be more of that need. Like you're looking for a job at this point. And that's where I think MMOs have shifted away from, because people didn't want to necessarily live in these virtualized worlds. And development costs have just only gone up. And despite people think that development's much easier, I think there's a clear pathway of data that shows that development's gotten harder. It's gotten riskier. There's not that as big of a return on investment. So you end up seeing an investment drive up. It's a whole ordeal. Anyway, let's see what he continues to say about Zepla, because I did see Zepla's video and we talked about that over at Work the Game for a while.
Speaking of positivity and happiness.
Is this going to be about her going to Genshin Impact?
Oh, no.
Released a 36-minute video going over all of her issues with FF14's current expansion.
It can't be
and
fixed.
larger core issues with
like the issues a lot of people propose go up against the mindset. So Yoshi P would have to kind of change the philosophy of how people step away and return to the game, because, like my solution this entire time is like, okay, take the relics, give them unique perks in content. Like say, okay, the raids aren't going to use these perks, right? But the deep dungeons will. And so that you end up having more build variety. Final Fantasy XIV lack of real, depth in those systems. The build variety isn't just leveling up another job. I push back on that argument every time, but anyway, yeah.
the game as a whole.
Man.
Now, this was surprising. I mean, that's like a WoW player saying World of Warcraft is actually a good game. Like, that is beyond controversial.
Yeah, you don't
and
get a lot of
yet,
that.
it seemed to go over well with a large amount of people agreeing. And
yeah, what was great about this Lepa video is how many people actually came and messaged me or tweeted at me talking about like, wow, like, Brian was, like, she's echoing a lot of the frustrations that I've brought into play. And that's where I was saying, like, it's only a function of time when you start to see the like anybody who's then a veteran come into it, and it rubs up against the new part of the community that is brand new and is looking at thousands and thousands or 12s of thousands of hours to play and enjoy in the different content. There are other things, though. The question ends up being is that was Shadowbringers, the Endwalker, the apex of this game's life, and that really is all going to depend on what the next saga is and how they get new players into that new saga. If players are still required to beat all of the previous expansions, that's going to be a real big challenge for a lot of new players. So yeah, a lot of players are frustrated. This is the season of bitch where people complain about everything. And then as the season of hype kicks up next year, as the expansion gets closer and closer, a lot of this stuff is just going to be water under the bridge. People are going to be excited about checking out the new jobs. People are going to be excited for the expansion because the vast majority of the community isn't super engaged in YouTube content or Twitch content. The vast majority of the community is the silent majority who is like, I'm going to play the expansion, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to play the expansion, and I'm going to take a break. And Yoshi P knows this. That's why the game is designed this way, and that's why veteran complaints, unfortunately, will fall on deaf ears. And the challenge is that with Zeplo or any full-time content creator, like, how do you bring your community along those lines? And in my mind, and this isn't to say Zepla is, shady or anything like that. Every time I've talked to her, she's been very pleasant. But this is to say that, like, I don't trust her. I don't trust the full-timers because we've seen this time and time again. It's a lot about leaning into what the group is thinking so that the way the group lifts you up, as opposed to challenging groupthink. You do so and you're going to get punished for it. And thankfully, that's where, like, I thrive. Oh man, like it's almost in a way, like, how many subscribers can I lose today? Because we're going to talk about the reality. And what ends up happening and what continues to happen is, given enough time, people who call me like a dirtbag and they'd call me an idiot will come back 6 months later later and go like, holy crap, dude, you were so right the entire time. And I go, it's more important for me to tell you the truth than to blow smoke up your skirt and then shift with the wind. It's more important for me just in my own life. That's something I think is critical.
Seeing through the Yoshi P indoctrination.
Well, you have to keep in mind that there were a lot of people who were angry at her about this video, and there was a subset of people who said that she used to be a Final Fantasy player. Now she plays Genshin. I hate her. Those people exist, and there's nothing you can really do about it, and that's weird, in that regards. I'm hoping she's enjoying Genshin. I enjoyed Genshin. I thought it was fun. Again, things like I like to return to, but man, I tell you, Star Citizen, dude, it's interesting. It's sandboxy. So is New World. New World's doing good. People do exist
in the game for its legitimate shortcomings, so clearly things are changing. Hence, me finally feeling comfortable to talk candidly about a game I used to love and genuinely want to see succeed.
So the question then is why weren't you willing to talk about it candidly before? Because you were worried about the blowback? Like that's what I'm kind of highlighting with, I think integrity is more important as opposed to the winds of change. So that's where it's like, I end up in a way feeling a little bit more contrarian because I look at the bigger picture. I talk about, you look at the development budget and planning of Yoshi P when Endwalker was coming out. It was all coming out during COVID and all that stuff. That was massive influx of new players. I don't know if that will happen again because the story of 14 was also about its building and rebirth, not just inside the game, but outside the game as well. And that in and of itself, invites a lot of people to come check it out. The fact that they're willing to end the story. And that's why I continue to reiterate that it's an RPG MMO as opposed to an MMORPG. And there's a vast difference in that style. That's not to say that it is less. It's actually to say, like, from a marketing perspective and, as a player perspective, it's a win. It wins every time as opposed to the loss. But if you're looking for the MMO, you're going to find some aspects very lacking or not as integrated or integral to the entire experience overall. But we can always agree to disagree on that point. But it's interesting from an integrity perspective. So this tells me like, yeah, there's a trend. Obviously, Zeppla coming out to say it opens it up. And we see that all the time in content creation. That's where trends and all these things forms. And that's where also you see bad actors. But that's also where you see people who just discount somebody's opinion as somebody who's just doing, following the trend. So I can't know anybody's heart. So I can't know if this is something that he's been wanting to really talk about, and then now he just feels that it's safe to talk about it. Clearly based off of the reaction. And the fact that Asmon's got at the time of this recording over 100,000, which, is always, that makes sense. That checks out. That's what he does. He reacts to content, and yeah, that sucks. Like I'm not a fan of the React meta, but here we are. Let's continue on with this React meta, shall we?
I'll be bringing up 4 main topics in this video. However, I won't be discussing the story since I'm a story skipper, so I don't have much to say on that. And it does seem to be one of the last remaining good parts of FF14.
So the quote that he's sharing on screen, I hope whoever wrote the 6.x patches is not riding Dawn Trail. That's what I've heard a lot. I haven't played the 6.x patches. Obviously, Dawn Trail is something that for me, if you guys haven't been following, I just posted my 1-year updates from retirement. I've lost over 40 pounds. I've got to lose another 60 plus. That's the first goal before I would consider playing Dawn Trail, and hopefully that happens before next summer because I'd love to play the expansion, see what the story is, and see where they're gonna go. But I'm also at the same time, like, if I'm late to the party, I think that's gonna be fine too. Obviously, I'll have a lot of catching up to do when that day does happen. But in the short term, I'm excited that it's coming to Xbox. There's a lot of really positive things to consider, but yeah, the general consensus from those that I talk to that are still playing it agree with what this is. And it's crazy to see it get so many upvotes on Reddit, where one of the things I talk about with the policing of this game and its community ends up being that you can't voice these kind of critiques. So this has changed, but I think it's also in part due to the amount of time between patches and the amount of time that people still have to wait until the expansion. That increased time makes that complaint season. When you think about, you got the season of hype, the season of grind, and the season of complaint about everything, like that increases that time for complaint, which only increases the drama, which creates the YouTube stuff, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy of that cycle continuing to go on and on until somebody has a huge blow up on their stream and yells at their community. And then that has to be something we talk about for a long time too, which sucks as well.
Oh. Topic 1. The formula is breaking down. For anyone that has played FF14 for longer than one expansion, we all know that this game operates on an extremely strict by-the-books formula with 0 surprises.
I think this has been an issue with a number of MMOs. I think this is an issue with World of Warcraft right now. It's an issue with Lost Ark, that the game is extremely formulaic. Everything happens the exact same way. And like, what the fuck? Destiny 2 as well. See, I don't play
Destiny 2
so
is
sure,
in that difficult spot, but the expansion will drop. For me, I don't need to go into Destiny in this video.
Yeah, I think that like a lot of people are looking for, they're waiting for like, what is that next generation new game hook that's going to keep people engaged with an MMO? Because right now, nobody knows what it is.
Expansion has 3 Savage raid tiers, 3 Alliance raids, 2 trial bosses at launch, and a new one every major patch, accompanied with a new dungeon. I mean,
Isn't this something I said about WoW? Like, I literally said this exact thing about WoW. Is that every expansion is so formulaic, I'm not as excited about them. Like, we've been effectively getting the same expansion ever since, like, I don't know, probably at least Legion, and you can argue since Mists of Pandaria. But I think really since Legion. Cataclysm was the first time that they really changed shit up a lot. But yeah, Legion was like Legion, BFA, Shadowlands, Dragonflight. They're all basically the same.
So what's interesting about this is that the formulaic nature of it is like they deliver on that, right? So from a surprises perspective, that's one of the things we've advocated for, especially in terms of like gearing and just the gear system alone and that and all that stuff. Like there are solutions to this problem, but there are solutions that break the fundamental rule of you should be able to step away from this game and you should be able to return this game, and like we're going to just hand you what you need, and so you can choose to stick with us if you want, but it is completely optional to do so, and then you can always play in bigger chunks. And this is, I wouldn't go as far as to say as the formula is breaking down. I think overall the formula is, the formula, it still is currently working. Now the question will be, from a data-driven perspective, what does Dawn Trail look like? Or are we seeing higher numbers, or are we seeing a slow decline at that point, thus indicating that the apex was Shadowbringers and the launch of Endwalker? Or do we see even higher highs? They'll continue to tout the player numbers, which they haven't increased that number, that announcement, in over a year, which tells me the new player numbers have slowed down. But they'll continue to tout those. Those aren't the active players. Those aren't the active subscribers. I, for one, would not be considered an active player of this game, but I would still be counted in that total, having purchased the game, and especially in multiple systems in this case. But I think, though, this is definitely something that feels right because it's something that just weighs on you the more you have. I think it's also that the lack of being able to take what they currently have and turn it into something new. It would be one of the things that it would be really cool to see. But yeah, it's formulaic to the point where like you can set a clock to it, and we have. That's why you see Chris and I from Work to Game, we predict things so accurately because you just plug it into the spreadsheet, and that's it's going to tell you what it's going to tell you, give or take a week, and that tends to be kind of how it goes. And that means, though, when to check in and when to check out, right? Anyway,
0 room for going above and beyond. Just stick to what has always been delivered. And people are just simply getting tired of it. There is definitely value in knowing what you'll be getting when you pay for an expansion. I mean, if any of you have been paying attention to Destiny 2, that game is a complete RNG loot box of what you'll get when you pay for an expansion. However, the downside to being extremely formulaic is you lose the ability to excite people. No longer am I sitting at the edge of my seat watching every live letter stream theorizing with my friends on what they'll announce next. I know what's coming. Another 24-man raid. One new dungeon. I wonder how many people... This is always a question that I've had.
is like how many people feel this way because this is their first time playing. Like for me, it was all this stuff was new because I had never played it before. So like, is this something that's just an outcome of you playing the game for a long time and finally, you know, that kind of wearing off? Or is it something that's like intrinsic to the game? It's probably a bit of both.
What's wild about this, though, because like he's absolutely right. Asmon's right. Like it's a bit of both. You have that wearing down. You also have this other aspect that I think of when I think about, you know, gamers and this need for that surprise and delight, is that you end up seeing a lot of frustration. People who are like, oh, just make something brand new, but then they don't know what the brand new thing is. Make something that makes me feel like I felt like when I was a kid. Okay, you know, like, you know, just make it fun. Just make it good. You know, like, you know, increase the mechanics that are added. Don't repurpose so many things. And there's only, you know, there is only a finite amount of things that aren't going to feel like something else, right? Like people, you know, meme on, you know, MMOs for the the delivery and the fetch quests and the kill quests. Like, it's like, what else is there? It's like, well, okay, like how do you then bring in the environment, the music, and so much more that make that, you know, feel like something epic, feel like something really exciting to see in the long run. But I don't think there is really a cure. I mean, outside of them changing up the formula and running the risk of losing everybody. And that's, I think, a bigger risk, a more concerning risk in the long run. I think that overall is going to be something that you're going to lose people. And then the goal is, how do you invite people back? It's the same thing I talk about with New World. It's the same thing I talk about with any of these games as a service games, is that one part of it is Yoshi P's talked about how they'll do marketing to keep the current players, because you see it, it's in the top of your mind. Hey, yes, this is a game I'm enjoying. You're not necessarily then being served an ad for another game to go and check out and play. But the other side of that is that, you know, like players and their engagement and just them enjoying the game in and of itself adds to that marketing level. But it's all about that, you know, what have you done for me lately? Not about like how you made me feel 10 years ago. And that's going to be the challenge that Final Fantasy XIV brings. And I think that's also going to be the challenge that Square Enix has to figure out who they are and what they want to be in the long run, because the real solution to all of these things is a brand new MMORPG. And it's wild to see that so many people are, stepping into that arena to make these brand new MMORPGs. Now, as I look here, we're at 5 minutes and 33 seconds into the video itself of 50 minutes. And this video is roughly 30 minutes. So here's what I'm going to do. I wasn't planning on doing this as a series, but what we'll do is we'll continue this as a series. So this is going to conclude part 1. And then that way, if you enjoyed, you can stick around for part 2, and I'll keep rolling these out. That way you can consume them in much easier chunks, considering I have barely even scratched the surface of this reaction video. So guys, if you enjoyed it, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I hope that you check out the Instagram link in the description to help me grow over on that platform. And I appreciate you guys and your support. Appreciate you guys in being here, and I appreciate any civil discussion that we have in the comments below. Lynx just made the point about how everything's so formulaic, how everything is just, there's no surprise, there's no delight anymore. And that in and of itself frustrates veterans.
Another 4 bosses in the Savage tier. Except actually the final boss of the Savage tier is 2 fights that are half finished to form a 5 boss raid tier. Pfft, whoa, dude. What if they just made 1 fight that was fully complete? Okay, sorry, that's besides the point. I got a little off my rocker there. The point is, veteran players that have been around for a few cycles of the 14 formula are just getting burnt out. And what's strange about this is Final Fantasy XIV has grown immensely. I mean, the popularity of this game has only gone up over time, which obviously...
Well, I mean, to be fair, that's showing 2021, which was the highest viewership of the game, because that's whenever a lot of people moved over to start playing it. Let's look at it right now. Okay, so that's the way it is.
Yeah, massive wave when Asmon came in, and then essentially, in a way, took a lot of the stereotype that people start to assume, and then broke that down, which brought in a huge new wave. I've seen people actually afraid that the game's coming to Xbox, that it's just going to ruin the culture. And honestly, I think some of the culture, like, there's a lot of good. Some of the culture sucks ass. And I honestly, you know, if the new waves of people can help balance out that kind of toxic console war mindset, then I think overall that's going to be a huge win. As will it peak beyond what we've seen already? No idea. But also, I just wonder if the new data center that's cloud-based is driven by Microsoft in this case. That seems like a winning proposition deal for both companies.
Is right now. Like, that's where he was showing. You see kind of what I'm saying, right? It's like it's not indicative.
Means way more.
Nobody plays it on Steam. Steam isn't the correct amount. Okay, I'll be right
Okay, to talk about that, that's like, I see people push onto that. It's a heat map. It's not that nobody plays on Steam. Plenty of people play on Steam. In fact, you can also play on Steam Deck, which is a great device to play Final Fantasy 14 on if you haven't already. Should come to GeForce Now. Come on, Square, bring it to GeForce Now. Let's go. But I see people push on that because it doesn't represent the total community. It represents the heat map because gamers are all the same. We're not going to sit here and, somebody who's playing on console and somebody who's playing on just normal PC, like, they are still going to be subject to the same, ebbs and flows of that. So it acts as a representation of the map, which ties in with the population report summaries and stuff that we see that are produced by the community as well. So when somebody pushes on the Steam aspect of it, like, I'm like, all right, man, like, I don't think you understand what we're actually discussing. And if you do understand what we're discussing, then you're misrepresenting the numbers intentionally.
Be right back. Go downstairs and just contemplate what I just heard.
You see, Bellular tweeting out, Final Fantasy 14 players, do you own the game via Square Enix or via Steam? 98% out of 10,000 voting that they own the game via Steam. If you've ever tried to purchase this game directly and have to go through all the hoops, Steam seems like the best way. Like, if somebody was saying, hey, how should I play on PC? I say pick Steam. Now you're going to be locked into the Steam ecosystem for pre-orders and so much more. That's not a bad trade-off. Not going to lie.
Also, Chatter is right. Most people don't play Final Fantasy on Steam. It's cheaper to use the in-house launcher. Okay, well, go ahead and if you have a high school diploma, if you have a college degree, time to ask for a refund. Need a refund.
Need a refund. Get it back on that. Yeah.
Revenue, and yet, what's to show for it? In fact, some of you might not know this, but in Heavensward, we actually got 2 dungeons per patch. We've steadily been getting less.
In ARR, we got 3 dungeons per patch. Like, this isn't new, and I get that it feels new for some people to feel like this, but this has been happening since then. And there's things that I think we lost that are unfortunate as a part of the 1.0 that I'd love to see. But that is just what it is.
Dungeons with every expansion because you know what Square Enix does?
What is it?
Instead of investing the increased revenue to grow the game, they only ever move development to different pieces of content, never increasing the overall amount of content. The mystical...
He doesn't know this. This is a massive assumption on his part. There's no way we do know that information. It just feels like that. So it sounds like right now Lynx is talking from an emotional truth perspective and not from like a actual practical perspective, because they've added people to the team. But he is correct that it's like they kind of move from content to content. So we get less dungeons, but now we get Criterion or something like that. And so, man, I don't find anything shady or squirrely about a company deciding to spend their money, how they decide to spend the money that we give them. Once we hand them the money, it's not ours to tell them what to do. That's their job to manage it. And we got a new CEO who's massively pro Final Fantasy 14 because I think it's kind of the one property they have that is actually making a ton of money. And hopefully we can see them continue to stop making these real wild exclusive deals, because I don't think that helps the games and the communities around the games at all. But I'll stand by that and I'll die on that hill for sure.
Question everybody's had this expansion is, where is Endwalker's Eureka and Bozja equivalent?
I think that Final Fantasy has a philosophy, like that team has a philosophy of not too much. And this is something that they did kind of with Final Fantasy 16. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but I wish there was like more content in the game. Like more hunts to do, more different stuff to do. I think that like what they worry about is like overwhelming players.
I could agree with that. I can actually totally get what Asmon's saying in terms of that philosophy, because Yoshi Peace talked about, overwhelming players and putting out too much content too soon. And so really the only people who are punished, are are those who are diehard, sticking with the game day in and day out. They're the ones who suffer, where somebody who takes a break and comes back all of a sudden has a bunch of content. When I come back and play Dawn Trail at some point, and assuming that I lose the rest of the weight, that I'm already down 40 pounds, shooting for a whole 100, trying to get over 100 pounds lost. When that day comes, like if that is around 8.0, then I'll have even more content to play through. So whenever that day comes, like then I'm going to have whatever's happened between then, and I'm not going to suffer for it at all. I've been enjoying many other games. It's been wonderful to be able to play these other games. And I think that's the healthiest gamer mindset. But there's this attractiveness to my game, right? There's this attractiveness to playing only one game to rule them all in this case. So I think that's a personal issue. That's got to be sometimes at some point you got to look at a gamer and say, you got to take some personal responsibility for your life. You got to pay off your debts. You got to stop living paycheck to paycheck. You can do these things. Just take your life by the reins and stop letting yourself get lied to, right? Stop lying to yourself, I think, maybe in most cases. Stop using Final Fantasy as your religion or your drug or your girlfriend, right? Like, get a life, figure it out. You can totally do it. And if you need help, you can always ask. I'm here to encourage you guys. There are so many great things about this life, and it's worth living. Keep it up. Anyway, don't be a
over delivery. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's called Criterion Dungeons. No Ishgardian Restoration equivalent in Endwalker? Yes, there is. It's called Island Sanctuary.
Ugh,
Less dungeons
so
and Stormblood
disappointed in that.
onwards? Well, that's to make way for ultimate raids. You see, despite FF14 exploding in popularity and the cash shop overflowing with overpriced garbage to milk the player base, Square Enix has never...
As I've wanted to say again, all cosmetics and all microtransactions are overpriced. There is no actual intrinsic value attached to any of them. They all have perceived value that is invented by the developer. There is no actual reason why these things cost the prices that they do. They are simply decided on by the developer.
Yes. That's all I want to add there. Oh my gosh, yes. And I'm glad that the cash shop is being called out, because people like to go and defend it because it's not directly connected into the game itself. I think that does help in a way, because it takes an extra step. But we're just like, there's no subscription MMO really, right? Like there's just WoW and 14, and maybe there's like a handful of others that I'm not even thinking of, but they all have cash shops, right? Like they're sub plus models as opposed to like sub only in this case.
Never added content to the game, only replaced content.
Same with every
and
game.
this formula is just getting stale. Do I really want to spend $15 a month just to do another 24-man raid that is exactly like the ones that came before it? Topic 2. Repetition breeds apathy. Beyond...
And I think this is kind of true. Is like, and like in general, I feel like there's a lot of people that feel this way about a lot of games. Like, because obviously I'm not like playing Final Fantasy super currently, and I didn't finish the end game content. So like I never really hit this wall with Final Fantasy, but I know that like for WoW and for Lost Ark and for I would say maybe a little bit of New World too, MMOs have a really big problem about feeling kind of samey, where it's like, oh, this is the same as what we've had before. This is...
But isn't that just the developer's response to mitigating risk? And MMOs are the most expensive genre to make and the most risky genre. And I think that is one of the reasons why we continue to see that sameness. And that's where I talked about in the first video, theme parks versus sandboxes, like where sandboxes is not nearly near as popular, but it has such a more, I think, dedicated and passionate player base that plays for a much longer and more invested time, because your investments reward you. They pay themselves off with time. And that kind of change has an immediate reaction. We saw that with Final Fantasy 14 1.0. It was a sandbox, and people rejected it. It was also flawed many, many ways. That's why I'm really hoping PAX Day or Ashes of Creation or something like that literally can, step in and truly do something spectacular in the long run. So we'll have to wait and see.
Oh, it's the same stuff as before. It's the same as before. And people just kind of feel like it's repetitive in general. And that's the way I felt about Diablo 3, for example. That's why I stopped playing it, because like every season I was doing the exact same stuff. Like I'm just playing the same game again. Well, what the fuck? That's what an MMO is, though.
No, it's what
Classic's not like that.
Well, yeah, Classic is, and as somebody who I can't speak to well, that's where it's like a lot of people have that ingrained expectation, and so all of a sudden when you start to go outside of that, people are immediately uncomfortable. So how do you invite people into that experience? That's going to be the next challenge, unless Square Enix decides to do with, let's say it's 17 or 18, let's say they do another Final Fantasy MMO follow up here. I would assume you would start to build that, and you would start to target that for the next generation of consoles as kind of like, here's a brand new piece of technology. We're going to sit here and make this. That would actually put 14 almost coming up on 20 years, like obviously maybe a little bit sooner than that. And then, man, geez Louise, you'd be looking at, 11 to 30 plus. Geez. Oh, anyway.
Classic WoW isn't like that. It is? Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. It is. But like it takes a lot longer to get through it all.
Just sticking to the formula for content releases, FF14 has also lost all creativity when it comes to encounter design, which was arguably FF14's greatest strength outside of the story for years.
This is a weird point for him to make, because I'm just going to push back on him and his idea right here, namely because he hasn't been playing it, right? I haven't been playing it, so there could be content that addresses that very point, but he hasn't experienced it, which he admits he's not playing the game. So I think it's probably essentially where he was just kind of got caught up, and yeah, things are looking like this, or that mechanic looks like that, in this encounter or that encounter. But come on, like that seems like a weird point to try and make when you're not actively playing it. It's not a point I would make, right? So.
In fact, one of my most popular videos on this channel is me selling the game to WoW players on how great the boss encounters are. But again, for those of us that have been around for a while, we have started to see the...
I don't get that take. Wait, what? Wait, what's the, that's kind of a bad take. What's wrong?
Ah, good. He agrees.
This guy's takes are bad. Encounter design is better than ever.
See?
Let me go
it
back
could be better than ever right now.
Because like, people found this very problematic, what he said.
Repetition 4-man raid that is exact. Beyond just sticking to the formula for content releases, FF14 has also lost all creativity when it comes to encounter design, which was arguably FF14's greatest strength outside of the story for years. In fact, one of my most
popular... the fights aren't creative. Okay, why?
Video.
See, I think it's the lack of the investment, right? You can't go farm like those pieces of content for materials that then gets put into the economy, which then people generate into even cooler stuff, right? Like, player-driven economies solve a lot of that problem, but they do create their own problems, right? Like it's not there's no perfect solution. Hope nobody thinks that whenever I'm advocating for what my preference is, that I'm like, oh, this is better. It's not better. It's just different, and it solves the problem that people are addressing or complaining about. Not that it doesn't, introduce new problems.
Videos on this channel is me selling the game to WoW players on how great the boss encounters are. Why? But again, for those of us that have been around for a while, we have started to see the utter lack of innovation when it comes to boss design, even in the ultimate fights. Every mechanic is just a random combination of group stacks, prey markers, tether grabbing, limit cut, tower soaking, or God forbid clock spots. I mean, it's all been done before. There is no interesting new mechanics that challenge your gameplay ability. If you're a veteran player or no one, tell me if this sounds familiar to you. Oh, this mechanic is like this other mechanic in that other boss. Every boss is just a reskin of mechanics used in previous fights over and over. All you have to do when learning a new Final Fantasy XIV boss is find the safe spot, because do you know what every FF14 mechanic in existence is? Stand and let thing resolve. Seriously, when I had this realization is when I lost...
I think there's a lot of mechanics in Final Fantasy that are the exact same as in WoW.
Yeah.
Like,
that's why I continue to advocate that I love open world content. People are like, oh, it's just a Zerg fest. Sometimes. But it's always different. Like, you never know what to expect because you're just dealing with so many people. And I love that beautifulness of what the MMOs offer. And Final Fantasy XIV, in a way, outside of Hunts and, Bosha and Zadnor and, Eureka, like, oh man, like that's where I'm like, there's such potential for that for me in this game. And I'm really hoping that they continue to make that kind of investment, or at least see that as like, what do they want the next MMO to do? And I think the evolution of the MMO in my mind is the sand park. It's not the theme park. It's not the sandbox. It's the blending of those two systems that allow you to then have that level of investment payoff for those who want it, but also the ability to step in and enjoy a story and step out like they currently do in the current state of 14.
There is, and subjectively wrong is someone who clears Savage and Ultimates is better than ever now. Yeah, it's like, for example, like let's see what the next mechanic is.
All interest in FF14 encounter design. Stand and let thing resolve. That is every
so
mechanic.
Kill an ad.
There is no innovation to the...
Okay, that's Raw Den. Raw Den has this exact same mechanic. There are two different mobs that spawn on opposite sides of the room, and you have to decide which one you're going to kill. And based off of the one that you kill, it's going to do different things.
Gameplay. Just simply a new twist on stand and
let thing resolve.
Where other MMOs have moving platforms that require careful jumping, boss attacks that...
Moving platforms that require careful jumping. So that's actually one of the things I really liked about Wayfinder, is that Wayfinder implemented and integrated actual platforming into its boss fights. Like that one fight that I did where you have to like move against like the squares or like Andros and like the original Star Fox. I thought it was really cool. I like that. And also I've said many times, right? Volton is one of the greatest. It is the best ARPG isometric fight that I have ever played, and nothing even comes remotely close. It is amazing. It's actually disgusting how good it is.
One of the things I do wonder, though, is that as they've been overhauling their technology stack and their framework, like we're seeing with the multiple dies, and you might not equate mechanics to the multiple die system from a memory management perspective, I do wonder that as they continue to refine their core game, the core tools that it opens up them to create new things like that. But you still run the risk of doing something that people then hate, and that's not the story. So I tend to see where they're, Final Fantasy 14 is their safe harbor for the time being, and I don't, unless the players actually actively demand it, like will I think it ever change? Because Yoshi P wants to make the game that the players want to play, and I think from the metrics, that's exactly what he did, and that's what's going to continue on.
Can be countered, which dynamically changes the fight every pull, or using...
But the thing is, though, is like with Lost Ark, there are the same problems, though.
Yeah.
The same problems are, like, there's, X3 plus 1, there are the soak transitions, there is the counter thing. Yeah, Lost Ark has the same issue, it's just a different list of complaints. Like, for example, like, you don't really stack up a lot for, like, big AoEs. Like, you do every once in a while in Lost Ark. Like, for example, like, after the Vicus typing test, after I fail it, everybody would usually stack up for, like, a Gunlancer shield or something like that, sure. But for the most part, you don't really do a lot of stacking. But otherwise, there are a number of things where you behave totally differently because the game is functioning differently. But inside of that game, there is a lot of sameness.
Height and gravity.
Yeah, Velganos pizzas. How many bosses have a Velganos pizza now? I know that Vicus has Velganos pizza. What other bosses have that? Brel, Gate 6. Clown? Clown has Velganos pizza? Yes. Oh, now I remember, because we usually sidereal that. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So that's what I'm saying, right? Is like Lost Ark has the same problem.
To create fun moments, all FF14 has is...
And also, by the way...
Stand and let thing resolve.
I have to tell you that if you compare that to Maiden of Vigilance in Tomb of Sargeras, there is a lot of also stand and let thing resolve. And the soak there is the exact same thing. And the slam here is you just stand there and let it resolve. It's the exact same mechanic. Now, I do think that World of Warcraft in general does verticality better than Final Fantasy. In terms of like the fights. Like, for example, like you go down here and it knocks your character up. I think that's really cool.
Yeah,
at least from what I've seen.
Final Fantasy 14's done some of that, but I would have to take his word on the WoW side of it.
But overall, I think it's just
But Yoshi P continues to say he wishes he had WoW's budget. So, like, it could be just a budgeting issue. And maybe the new CEO will have a huge impact on the future development, because they did come out and say, we'll spare no expense. And what people assume is that you feel that instantly. And I've been always saying, like, I feel 7.0, you'll start to feel that we'll spare no expense on this game much more deeply.
like WoW has different problems.
Moments. All FF14 has is stand and let thing resolve.
See, that's like standing inside of it and then having you can see obviously the damage is split, I believe, with all the people that are like in that group, and so they're like soaking it together. So there's a number of bosses that work like that. They're actually, the term is, well, Saber Lash is usually referred to as a tank soak that only tanks soak, but like something like this, there's plenty of bosses that do that. Like Ultraxion does that. Major Domo Staghelm does that in Firelance. There's many bosses that do a mechanic that's exactly like this.
Grab the
Meteor
tether
soak, yeah.
and let it resolve. Go to clock
Blood Queen Lanathel in ICC.
spots and let it resolve. Hide behind the rock and let it resolve.
There's a lot of those in WoW too. Saffron.
And this repetition of reusing old mechanics over and over on top of a non-changing gameplay form.
This just feels like he went from an unknown game, a new experience, and being able to enjoy it, to understanding the game, understanding what it is. And so that ties back into the no surprises. So there's nothing that seems to have that surprise and delight, which means in a way, like, maybe play another game, step away from video games for a while. There's this sense of chronically online, chronically gamers who complain about some of the dumbest stuff that doesn't really matter. That, it's like, okay, for them it does, because that's everything. That's their whole reason for being. And that's why I continue to encourage people to pay off their debts, own their life. Don't let all these, $1 billion and $1 trillion banks control you. And I think like that in and of itself is all somewhat related. So a lot of people who maybe don't feel like they have much control in their life feel like they can do something here in this virtual world, but then the virtual world becomes very stale because it's a game designed to take money out of your pocket and put it in Square Enix's, or any other game by any other publisher in that case. But yeah, all right, let's keep it going.
Formula leads to apathy. No longer are we challenged and asked to improve our gameplay ability. We are simply tasked with finding the safe spot and standing there until the thing resolves. And challenge in FF14 has actually been going backwards. The game is not even maintaining the difficulty it used to have.
I don't think it's ever maintained the difficulty, with maybe rare exception for the Ultimates, but I even hear that isn't so ingrained into the differences. We've noted this every expansion. Like, as soon as the expansion drops, it feels like all the previous content just becomes just way, way easier. And that's a leveling aspect, a gearing aspect, perhaps a knowledge aspect. But yeah, like, that's where I want to see them rethink their level sync, because I think whenever I hit level cap and I'm running low level content, it's very boring, very slow. And the lack of skills, I think they could really rethink that entire system, and it would benefit the game and the players in the long run, thus bringing in, content. People are, that would ruin the difficulty. They already have. Like, there's no difficulty to protect in this case. And I don't think, and based off the pattern and what we've known, I would predict, yeah, I think Criterion is going to get easier naturally. But could be wrong. Would love to be wrong.
But actually making everything easier and easier.
I don't know about this, because it's kind of hard to say, because isn't the Omega Protocol, which is the most recent raid that they did, the Ultimate, isn't it the hardest one they've ever done? I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah,
but I think what Lynx is talking about is literally about how past content and the content that they have as a part of the, let's say, call it a vault, continues to get easier. It's not that they can't introduce new content that challenges you, but overall it's getting easier. But that also brings into mind that people learn more about the game. They learn more about the jobs. Like, you have more people who know more about it, so your knowledge base also increases, which would naturally, again, that all goes back into my first reaction part of this is that what is difficult content? I think of it all as a function of time. What content is going to take so much time And that is essentially how I think about it. I think about it as content that takes a lot of time versus content that is very easy to pick up and put down. And then you have the spectrum as opposed to some difficulty curve in this case, because people, they'll get better. Like they might get a better piece of hardware. Who knows? There's so many different things that comes down into it. But let's let Asmon finish his thought, and then it looks like he's about to make, Kamali's about to make 0.3. So we might just table 0.3 for the next video. If you guys aren't seeing, we're breaking this up just because it's so much to talk about here.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people saying like it broke their guild, like they quit the game over it. It was so bad.
That could also be the story.
The Savage Tier 2, yeah. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily true.
Pick 3.
So, yeah, but that's always going to happen, right? There's so many stories. I was talking with Comic Story, and it's like, yeah, eventually just like the reason to do so dips out. And then what happens is that they'll create an expansion, and people will be curious about the expansion. Does it address all the issues? Maybe no, but maybe it addresses a handful. That hype will bring people back. That hype will take anybody who's latent and have them play again, and then the game will be positive. And so you'll see a lot of positivity. However, as the community grows, though, I think as more and more veterans hit into that category and are willing to speak up about it, I think that is in and of itself a good thing. I think the discussion is a good thing. We should encourage these kind of critiques. We should encourage these kind of videos. We should encourage each other to be as honest as we possibly can be when it comes to where we're feeling, how we're playing, what we have going on in our lives. And that's something that I think is to be commended and hopefully, championed by the wider Final Fantasy XIV community. Will it happen? I don't know, because social media is a weird, mixed bag of chips, right? You have people who, are just trolling. You have people who are, it is their one and only thing. It's the thing that they live for. And any critique is like you're insulting their mom or their girlfriend or their wife or something like that, or their husband. So at the end of the day, that's why I'm always worried about censorship. That's why I'm always worried about that. And I know people come out of the woodworks when we talk about this here. And at the end of the day, I'm going to disagree with you, because censorship only leads to more censorship, and it doesn't actually make it better. Just because you want to have that, that belief, life isn't that way. You're going to run up against people who don't agree with that. And if you can't handle those discussions, you need to get your life in order in a way. You need to get yourself into a place of confidence that you can have those discussions and be perfectly fine with agreeing to disagree. Let's see what they have to say about 0.3.
Pick 3. It wasn't always like this. I understand that I might be coming across as a bitter old man yelling at kids for having fun. I'm only 24, by the way. But trust me, I absolutely despise nostalgia lords.
The fact that he's 24, I think if you're looking for any kind of cannon fodder to throw his way, that means his brain isn't fully developed. But we'll just leave it at that. That's just science. That's just science speaking here. Anyway.
Who blindly think everything was better in the past. However, we can empirically say that Final Fantasy has only gotten easier with every expansion. Class design has completely stagnated and lacks any growth at all. I mean, it blew my mind that an actual popular opinion these days is to make combo skills just one button that you spam over and over. Yeah.
That is a great idea, especially for us controller players, because the way that combos are set up, it's 1 2 3 1 2 3. But when you see how they already bring it in with so much other ease, you could actually make a more engaging system with that level of simplification. And simplification in that regard does not guarantee that it means we're just going to make this one button press to win. I think from that aspect, right, when we look at how the jobs level up over time, the volume of skills that they have to prune and re-add and things like that, this could end up being such a beautiful evolution, especially for keyboard and mouse and controller players, because if you're going to sit here and try to make the argument that like a 60 button combo for a job means that it's fun, if that's your kind of fun, that's incredible. But I think overall, I'm not against that. And it's interesting that I see people agree with Lynx in this case, but no, not any stretch of the imagination. I think that is something that's going to be very helpful because it frees them up slots to add in different kinds of skills, because the big part of the skill gap is the weaving of skills between your combos, thus increasing your overall DPS. But anyway, you guys let me know if you agree or disagree, because I'm gonna die on that hill. I'll keep advocating for something like that, because that will make just the quality of life so much better, especially as they go to a level 100, and assuming there's going to be a level switch in the future.
A great idea, geniuses. You know, what if we just made every class have one ability called the I win button? Maybe then you could...
No one's making that argument, but that's how you set up an argument to, you know, to make yourself look, was it as a straw man? I guess that's, I don't know. You guys let me know. That's where it's like, yeah, those things aren't the same, right? Like, yes, no one's advocating for the I win button. The game is easy enough as it is. You know, I'm not going to apologize for that. That's how the game is. It's an easy game. It's built easy because they want you to be able to solo play the whole thing, and that's where they're going with it. And anybody who tells you otherwise is delusional. Like, the game is meant to be a single player Final Fantasy game.
Convince yourself you're a good player. For each...
I don't think that being a good player matters. I think that having fun matters. I don't think that it makes you a good player. It doesn't... Like, the ability to memorize a rotation, I feel like, is a pretty low-tier skill indicator, personally. I think a better skill indicator is being able to, like, actually adapt and improvise what your rotation is based off of what's happening at the current time.
I think if you separate the different types of players, you're going to have people who align with them, because I think the vast majority of us play games to have fun. However, there are those who really want to have that level of, I don't know, professionalism, that level of dedication, the super fans, the super hardcore, and like for them, you know, like the difficulty is a part of the fun. And so I don't want to, like, I think that's where, when we were having these kind of conversations, you almost in a way have to stop just kind of grouping the entire player base together. You got to really segment them off into their own, you know, specific. Hey, got it. There we go. You know, different lanes, because then you can have that deep conversation. Because one of the things that actually is interesting is that as easy as content gets, it ends up, you know, leading to apathy. It ends up leading to a just like the lack of enjoyment, where challenging content at least has some value over the long run. But this is a rewards, like, there's so many different systems at play here. Is there a, like, if you're going to say, like, oh, if they just do this one thing to fix it, like, I think when you look at what an MMO is from my definition, which is that classic definition, it's that online metaverse, you know, persistent world, as opposed to the theme park model. And again, the theme park model won out. Like, it makes so much sense. It is so easy to understand. People expect it. And because of those things, then you end up having those. It all just works out that way. Anyway, I'll let Asmon continue.
I don't really think that you need to have these super complex rotations. And also, making a game harder doesn't make it better. Whenever people make something easier, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a downgrade from what it was before. There have been a lot of cases where, like in WoW, for example, there have been things that were made easier, and like complications and annoyances that were just removed, and I think that it was an overall improvement of the game. Lost Ark has 8 skills, yes. It's not fun, though. What I'm saying is that it not being fun is not an outcome of the amount of buttons. It's an outcome of the impact and the meaning of the buttons. For example, I think that World of Warcraft Classic and Wrath of the Lich King, to a lesser extent, playing a class is more fun at that time than it is in retail WoW. Even though
a part of this is, it feels like there's a level of gatekeeping that we're talking about here, where and we all do this as human beings, you know, like when you kind of look at, like, oh man, you know, I went through it, you know, this is something that's kind of a rite of passage. And when that gets easier and easier, there is, no matter what, like, there isn't a knock-on effect. There isn't, it is not making your experience less, but it does run the risk of having that as a feeling. So it doesn't change the facts of the situation and what you went through, but it does and has that impact on that same feeling. Because what I end up seeing a lot from the player base ends up being is a passion for people who want somebody to have that same kind of experience, the same kind of impact. And since they can't have that again, that initial reaction, especially, that's one of the reasons why the story is so, paramount to the whole thing. You end up having that kind of connection with that person, because you can then, that's the best way to relive it. But outside of the kind of the gatekeeping aspect, because there's a theme of that I think Asmon's getting at, it ends up going into like, yes, just adding in more buttons doesn't automatically make things more fun. Just making it easier doesn't make it less fun. It's the impact of what those skills mean, how they work together. Because again, like when you start to think about Mario, Super Mario Wonder just came out. I'm going to smack the mic because why not? And Super Mario Wonder, like it doesn't have to have all of these complexities to still have that kind of fun. But obviously, like 14 isn't trying to be Mario, and Mario isn't trying to be 14. I think it's, you want to kind of focus in on your lane and have that kind of connection there.
No, retail is way more complicated. Even though retail is way more involved, I have more fun playing the game in like Classic or in Wrath. So this is what I'm saying, right? Is that it doesn't really matter to me like how hard something is. I think people always get this fixation on, oh, this content is so hard. Who cares if it's hard? It's about if it's fun.
Gaming used to have a philosophy on class design he called moments of glory, where classes were not meant to be jacks of all trades, but instead have moments in encounters where their specific class had an area to really shine and do something.
Yeah, and with the philosophy of bring the player, not the class, with the philosophy of the ease of access to the open world and so much more, we don't see that bring the class, not the player aspect. And that's, if you go with the bring the class, not the player, you solve this problem, but you introduce a new problem. And the problem is that somebody might run the risk of having a class that people don't bring along, that's not welcome in content. And the thing is, and the sad truth about all that is it's still the case. Like you still see people who will gatekeep on the class itself. So I think oh man, this is always kind of like, I wish we would go back to a primary bring the class, not the player aspect, and then bring in more of that player freedom and that sandbox to let players experiment, break, and then have the developers in that constant set of like, okay, we want to make this adjustment and that adjustment. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no perfect system. There's no solution truly to that problem except for the demand. Like, so if the players end up demanding, something like that, I think you would see that return to form. But again, I think we're talking about a niche within a niche within a niche of players who truly are frustrated by this. And those are the players that have hit over 10,000 hours. Those are those players. You don't see this from someone who's there in 5 hours in, 50 hours in, 500 hours in even, Anyway.
Special.
Yeah.
Where are modern day FF's moments of glory? Pressing fell cleave 5 times in a row? Yeah, that's real interesting and unique.
Well, I think that the reason why they don't have the moments of glory are because this is a very double-edged sword. And it's one of the things where, like, whenever you ask for this, whenever people want this, then it's like, oh, that's great. Like, they're like, okay, yeah, this is what I want. And then whenever they get it, they're mad about it. I think a really good example of this is like Gateway. Like Warlock's Gateway. Like a lot of people are annoyed that only Warlocks can make gateways. People were really annoyed that only Warriors had Rallying Cry. People were very annoyed that certain classes had these indispensable buffs that everybody had to have in order to use them. Like Augmentation Evokers are a good example of that now for World of Warcraft. And this is, I haven't really played a lot with them, so I'm speaking from like secondhand experience from what I've heard. I could be a little bit wrong about this, but what my understanding is that everybody feels like they need them because they have this functionality that's indispensable. And I think that the problem is like, it's a grass is always greener on the other side situation, where whenever you have games that have moment of glory classes, then you have people saying that like, oh, well, it feels really bad to not have this. Like, for example, imagine doing Nefarian when...
The only thing is, and I can't speak to what he's about to talk about with WoW, so I'm jumping in. Players will optimize the fun out of anything. Like, this is where I feel like the player base in and of itself continues to advocate for things that they are going to be upset by. And that's, I think, human nature. I can't fix that. I can't cure that. I can only just continue to say, like, yeah, some players are going to feel screwed. And then that's like, there's a level of personal responsibility that those players need to take, right? But then outside of that, these games are about making money. They're about attracting as many people and holding on to them. And if those players are spending money, then their vote counts just as much as mine. And that's why they outnumber this mindset. That's why it's so much more popular than the alternative. That's why the solutions aren't solutions for many people, because they don't want that kind of game. They all, honestly, sometimes I just wonder if they just want the impossible.
When you didn't have mages, so you couldn't AoE down the ads that spawn at 20%. That would be really bad, right? But having the mages, it feels really good. And that's the difference. But they changed that, and so now everybody has an AoE. Everybody has these tools. Because the reason why is that people didn't like it. Now, my opinion is that I think people do like it, and I think that it does make the game better, and I think that they should continue doing it. I think Classic WoW is an indicator of that. However, let's not pretend that these moments of glory were not removed by the request
There it is.
of the players.
Yep, there it is. Exactly.
The players wanted these removed.
They did.
The only class that can even have a moment of glory is Black Mage, which is coincidentally the class that the game director Yoshi P plays, in which they can save up instant casts and procs to do an entire phase of an ultimate fight without ever needing to hard cast a single spell. Now that's really cool! Try and find any other moment of glory on any other class. They don't exist. Bosses that used to
also, like, this is kind of, it's not congruent with, like, the point that it makes fights that fights are getting easier. Because whenever you have classes that have moments of glory, what you do is you enable fights to be very easy. Because that's what the glory is attached to, right? Because you don't want to make it mandatory, right? Because you make it mandatory, well then it's like, okay, well now it's like it's no longer a moment of glory.
See, and that's where in the past we've seen fights that are built for different compositions, right? So it's not a matter that like everybody can clear it, bring the class, not the player, as opposed to bring the player, not the class. And then it just comes back again. That way you're like, oh, we don't have this. And when you have that, when you think of it in terms of the party, the multiplayer synergy, I think it's that constant battle between like solo versus multiplayer, hardcore versus casual. I think a lot of these problems are solved by economics in a way, like just having everybody always kind of working towards a goal, the hardcore working towards that goal much faster, but every casual player out there is still chipping away at that. And I think that's something that I always felt very lacking, where in Final Fantasy 11 it felt like, at least with the Conquest and some of the other systems, like there was some impact that I was having, whether I was intentional or not. That asynchronous multiplayer aspect, something that I truly, truly crave. And that's what I get out of New World. That's what I get. And, you know, when we look at some of the upcoming MMOs on the horizon, that's where a lot of that seems to be moving. The question ends up being, is that it's sustainable? I don't know.
Or it's just a requirement. But like what happens is that if you have certain classes for certain bosses, it just makes the boss like 1,000 times easier. I'll give you one example. Halphus Wormbreaker in Bastion of Twilight. This came out in the first tier of Cataclysm, and at the time, priests did healing based off of the damage they dealt. So as soon as a priest did damage to a target, then that damage will then be applied to the lowest health person around them. But because Halphus took extra damage, it made priests way better. So if you had 2 priests healing on that fight, the fight was a joke. It just completely invalidated the fight. It didn't matter at all.
That sounds fun.
Also, another good example of this is the reason why pets take a lot of extra damage from boss melee attacks is actually because of Firelands. And what people used to do in Firelands is they used to fight Majordomo Staghelm, who was the second to last boss in Firelands, and they had a pet tank it because the AoE, like radial cleave that he would do, would have a 90% reduction on a pet, and it would never actually do enough damage to kill the pet. So everybody would literally just have a pet tank the boss and then just slowly DPS the boss down, and then the boss died.
Ramu,
that's why
until
bosses do way more damage to pets now. It's because of Firelands. So the problem with having these things that are moments of glory is that they allow you to trivialize fights, because that is the moment of glory. The fact that now I can trivialize this mechanic because of my utility or my skill at using my class. So I actually am on the side of give classes those moments of authority, or not authority, moments of glory, give them the ability to trivialize fights, and just make the game fun and make it rewarding and make it feel good.
That is so easy to say. Like, that is the most cop-out thing that any gamer says. Just make it fun, just make it good, just make it feel amazing. And if there was only a switch, if there was only a button that you could press to make that actually happen to be true. I think that bottled up is the great thing to sell. Like, they got it, but you don't end up seeing the, hundreds of millions and thousands, dollars and hundreds of thousands of hours, working towards getting that. And then you also run the risk, especially when the players are frustrated by it, right? So that's where, again, players optimize the fun on any game. You gotta be careful. And that's where, when it comes to feedback, sometimes the perfectly acceptable answer is no, we're not going to do that. And we've seen Yoshi P say that, but he's also said that he wants to build what the players want. And I think that's, when we look at what the vast majority of people want, they want the cash shop, they want glamour, they want a better housing system, but who doesn't? And they want, a game that they can kind of just pick up and play when they want and step away when they don't. That's the majority. That's the silent majority that dictates kind of the state of the game. And, they're not wrong, right? Like, that's who's playing, that's who's paying, hardcore gamers like Lynx and myself, no, we're not, our money isn't going towards that bucket. And if Square Enix wants to, have that change, like, I'm all for it, but I think I'm just going to do what Yoshi P tells me to do. Play the game, take a break, play the expansion, take a break, play the next expansion, take a break, and so on and so forth. And that's a hell of a good way to, add a subscription to a single player game.
Fuck everything else. That's my perspective. But you're not going to make a game hard that way. Isn't Limit Break and Sidereal Gauge something as a moment of glory for the party? It is, but it's not, because usually it's min-maxed. Like, for example, how many people use the Sidereal in Vaulton for the first transition? They use Balthor on Vaulton first begin. So, like, everybody uses it, right? And then maybe they use Balthor again at the end whenever he's doing the all the attacks at the end, right? Everybody does this. So it's like, Limit Break, yeah, it becomes just simply a tool that fits in a hole.
Require planned movement, careful positioning, and a consideration for your melee DPS's positional skills have devolved into bosses with hitboxes as big as the arena, or the godforsaken wall boss, where boss movement is literally impossible. I might as well just be punching the air with how little the actual enemy I'm fighting matters in an encounter. Raid buff abilities that used to have varying cooldown lengths requiring planned and coordinated burst timing to maximize damage on an encounter have devolved into every buff skill either having a 60-second or 120-second cooldown, completely removing the planning of burst windows. And there's still so much more!
And I can guarantee you that people probably asked for that, didn't they? Yeah, I bet.
I think that they did, and then I think what I've heard more from any other active player is just how painful that ends up being.
But they did, yeah. This is the same thing that happened with WoW. And also, like, stacking cooldowns is kind of a problem. Because, like, so here's the problem with stacking cooldowns. Is that, and this is something that happened in Legion.
All right, Pank.
Is, let's say you're doing 100% damage.
The true
and then plus 20%.
End game.
Right? And then plus 50%. And then plus, let's say, another 30%. Actually, 30% is kind of hard to add. Let's do another 50%.
120%.
Okay? So these are multiplicative. So this is 120. And then 50% of 120 is not 50% more. It's 60% more. So now we're up to 170, right? Or sorry, 180, right? And now we have over here, 50% of 180 is 90. So now we have 270%. So you see what I'm saying? So you have 270% damage. And what ends up happening is that if you have a character that can do 270% damage, this means that outside of that burst window, in order for the class to be balanced, they can only be actually doing about 30% damage. So how many of you guys back in Legion, for example, felt like you were just...
Let me know if I've got my math wrong, or he's got his math wrong, or I'm not understanding how he's doing his equation, unless it's basically going off of some kind of compound. So it, instead it'd be 50, percent of a 120, and you're adding in, basically 60 to that. So I get, yeah, okay, I see what he's doing. And then you take 50%. So yeah, I thought he was adding, and I was like, no freaking way, man. Okay. I figured it out in midst of asking you guys the question. Smash like.
Limp dicking a boss until all your cooldowns came up, because that's the way I felt. I was just limp dicking a boss until the cooldowns came up, then I did all my damage, and then I waited for my cooldowns to come up, and that's why it got changed.
The complete irrelevance of enmity and removal of tank stances, healers being completely gutted into only having 2 damage skills, DPS classes having unique and interesting targeted utility skills like Mana Shift and Palisade deleted from the game, conal AoEs that used to require dynamic movement and aiming to hit the most amount of enemies homogenized into every AoE attack being a circle around your character so you can't possibly miss an attack. I mean, I could go on forever! Cross-class abilities that used to incentivize trying other jobs by leveling them up to borrow a skill for your main job are now just auto-unlock role abilities, attribute points.
Yeah, because people complained about it. They didn't like it.
Yeah.
And this is like, I think this is the point, right? Is that a lot of people don't like this kind of stuff. They don't want to have to level up another job in order to play their main character. Because it was bad. Yeah, like for example, like with New World, a lot of people didn't like the idea that they had to farm out PvP for the Greatsword artifact weapon. I was one of them. Now, I'm a pretty serious player, so I just did it, and it is what it is, and I have it now. But there's a lot of people out there that they see that, and they say, fuck that, I don't want to do it. It sucks, yeah. That's why, for example, Arena Gear got nerfed in Wrath. Arena Gear was like on par with like Raid Gear and Burning Crusade, but then they nerfed it because people all said they had to do Arena.
It added another layer of growth while leveling your character by giving you extra stats are gone. I mean, Jesus Christ, every expansion is just another round of wait and see what they delete this time. Ugh. Misshapen Chair made a video going in-depth about how the dumbing down of class design is removing interest for veteran players, and I want to say that these changes don't help new players either. The greatest strength a game can have is being a game that is easy to learn but difficult to master. What happens when the game is easy to learn and easy to master? You know, as veteran players, we often have to huff copium by saying that...
I think that this person places too much value and too much importance on the hardcore, competitive, difficult aspect of the game. I feel like there is... So, like, whenever I think about a game, right?
Oh, paint again.
Like, this is the game. This is the entire game. And, like, this is the competitive aspect of the game. It's there. It matters, but it's not as big as you'd believe.
Well, the game isn't made for us. It's made for new players, and us veterans are just marketing tools to get new players to try the game. But that doesn't last forever. There isn't an infinite pool of new players you can constantly bring in. Eventually, those new players become veteran players too.
Or maybe somebody needs to stop focusing in on content creation full time and figure out how to make a family. So that way new players, at some point this is going to be a problem. I don't know if you believe it yet or not, but looking at the data, woo boy, I'm glad I got 6 kids, yo, 'cause just doing my part. I get it though. I understand how difficult it can be. But man, there's so many people. I'm just like, I hope we don't see this like 20 or 30 year thing where all of a sudden everybody's just sad that they chose not to have children.
And they will realize all the problems with the game and end up logging out for the last time. What happened?
Square Enix has already made its money. Like I don't see a problem with that at all.
I think that a lot of people, you're never going to actually get them to start raiding or to start playing competitive content.
They've
like
tried.
World of Warcraft is never going to get the average player into a mythic raid. It doesn't matter like how enticing they make it or whatever. It's just not going to happen because people don't want to do that kind of content. And like that shouldn't really be your goal. And also like it's like no game like lasts forever, especially like these live service games. It's very hard to make them last for a long time.
happens when there is no more new players. Topic 4. Who is this game made for? Every simplification, every deletion of a system, every dumbing down of an interesting mechanic has always been seen as making the game more approachable. Mike, who is this game made for?
Who?
Every simplification, every deletion of a system, every dumbing down of an interesting mechanic has always been seen as making the game more approachable. My question is, with this never-ending crusade of making the game easier and easier without ever expanding the available content or adding on to the existing gameplay formula, what is the end goal for Final Fantasy XIV? Everything I loved about the game has either been removed or dumbed down to the point of being menial. As someone who got into...
So he's already admitted that he's a story skipper, right? So I think the thing that they make this for as a Final Fantasy game, it's a numbered Final Fantasy game. And that, like, if they made a Final Fantasy Online, they disconnected the number from that, I could understand his point way more. But when you... like when I think about Final Fantasy, even the MMO, like I wonder what they'll do with Vana'diel. Like I would personally love to see them remake 11, but I know that it's more, I don't know who, like, but if they ended up coming out with a single player, hell, I think I think every Final Fantasy game, you know, especially number 1, should have a 2D sprite remix like they did with Dragon Quest 11. Let's just make that happen, right? Like you want to play through Final Fantasy 11, as you know, like that solves also 16's problem where people don't want that action game. Make a, you know, a sprite based, you know, 2.5D HD version. You know, why not? I'd buy it, you know. I'd love to know what you guys think about that. Anyway, I think the big part of it is that clearly, since he is a story skipper, he's not playing this game for the story in and of itself. Therefore, like, who is this game for? I don't think him.
The game for the unique class design and amazing raid encounters, I've had to sit and watch as all the interest in class design was slowly whittled away, making every class dull and homogenized. I've had to sit and watch as all the creativity in raid design slowly evaporated into a mishmash of reusing the exact same mechanics for years on end. And if the trend continues, at some point, your favorite features will end up being dumbed down or deleted. So what is the end goal here? Who is the game made for? Cat moms who play 1 hour a month and spend...
Oh, I get this now.
Well, yeah, kind of.
I saw this on Twitter.
I mean, that's probably it. Yep, there we go. And I think, again, Final Fantasy is not a game that's built around hardcore players. And I think that the reason why Final Fantasy got so popular in 2021 and why it had been growing in popularity ever since Stormblood and you could say even Heavensward is because Final Fantasy... So let's say we're going to do another... We have 3 Microsoft Paint cards just for one video.
Paint's back, baby!
So this is the skill level of all players, right? These are the most skilled over here, and this is the least skilled. Final Fantasy does a very good job at attracting mid-core players. Like, yes, obviously you have people like the Ultimates are there and they exist.
I would argue that the mid-core is the weakest part of Final Fantasy XIV. That it feels that there isn't any like real meat on that bone, right? Like because you're not in the extremes and the ultimates, and there isn't anything that's going to scale to you. And it's either, and this is where like the solution in my mind is like with the trust system, for example, mix and match. Let me bring in a friend. Like if I just wanted to get on, a buddy's on, we can play as a 2-player, but we're going to bring in, you know, the trusts. Like let us mix and match that open world content that, you know, let us bring trust in the open world. And thus, if you could take trusts with you into the open world, thus guaranteeing that everybody's got a 4-man party at all times, you could balance all the mobs in the open world. So then you as a player, if you want to challenge yourself, if you want to do like a no trust run in the open world, and you know, as a black mage, then all of a sudden the black mage in and of itself doesn't have to survive like a tank does in the open world. Like there are solutions, there is a path forward, but I think the cost of that, or there's not enough demand for that, one of the two, probably both, is what's holding it back. But yeah, man, to say that it's, maybe I'm wrong. Like when, I mean, I'm not going to say like that I'm the be all end all when it comes to the opinions here, but I constantly lean into that. It's casual, which is that, RP and all that stuff. Like that, if that fits the niche, the hardcore with the ultimate raids, etc. but I always kind of felt the midcore was very, like, I don't know, just not as attractive as I find it in other games.
But World of Warcraft is very much centered around extremely hardcore players. It's very much centered around people that raid Mythic Plus or do Mythic Plus and raid Mythic, and they do like arena at a high level and they get good gear for it. Whereas like Final Fantasy XIV is very much, the reason why it's successful is that it appeals to that general audience. It appeals to that general audience who find the enjoyment in the simplicity of a nightclub in a video game to be refreshing and relaxing and nice, rather than people that are trying to, play the game 1 hour a day versus play the game, 12 hours a day. It is absolutely meant for those mid-core players. And those are the ones, I think, that really left WoW and went to Final Fantasy permanently.
Maybe that's what happened.
It's the mid-core players that feel like WoW just doesn't really give them any sense of satisfaction. And I think that Classic WoW was an incredible game for mid-core players. Because while it required a tremendous amount of dedication, it required actually very minimal level of skill. So you could be kind of shitty at the game, but as long as you played it a lot and you knew what you were doing, you could still keep up. And that's why Classic WoW was so good. It was good because it didn't reward people for being, CSGO, level of reaction time. It didn't reward people for, just showing up once a week and then just, turning in a daily quest and getting a level a week. You had to actually earn it. And that's it. DPS is also easy to play. Yes, it is easy to play. So I think Final Fantasy is absolutely designed for that mid-core audience. This is a bell curve? It is. And this is why this is the problem, right? Is that the bell curve is like this. Most players are in here. They want to play the game regularly. They want to take it more seriously, but they don't want to do Mythic raids. They don't want to do Mythic plus 20s. They just want to do something that's kind of challenging with their friends. But with your logic, shouldn't Final Fantasy have more players than WoW? I don't know if it does or not.
We have no idea. When it comes down to it, a lot of people think concurrency has any kind of value. They think, like, who knows? Like, in terms of total, you'll never, like, that's, I don't know if that's ever going to be, catchable. I mean, WoW, I think, it's insane. At some point, they had over 20 million subscribers at one point. Final Fantasy 14 could be bigger than WoW right now, but that's just gonna ebb and flow. I have no idea. Nobody does, really. And I think that's why they don't report the stuff, because people use it to try and sell a narrative, and we see that with any stats that people can get a hold of. That's why they're trying to beat up New World on the it's got enough players. It's doing fine. It attracts players. It keeps inviting players. It's making money. It's very profitable. Yeah. What's the end goal? Like, can it be more profitable? Certainly. But I think we're going to see that with them coming to consoles and controller support, which I'll be sure to keep you guys up to date on as well, because that's something that's really important to me.
Like, I have no clue. I think it probably doesn't. Yeah, I think that WoW is a lot bigger than Final Fantasy. I think there's a lot of reasons, by the way, why WoW still has more players. This is only one metric. There are a lot of other metrics and reasons. It's just a factor.
That entire time crying because the pixels on the screen said a sad word?
Yeah, see, so somebody who does not connect in with the story doesn't connect with the characters. Like, if you go and watch my Endwalker playthrough, like, it was so emotional. There was so much both in the real world and in the game, in the story and the characters, that it was like, absolutely. Now, I'm not a cat mom. I got 6 kids. And I would encourage people, not to sit here and put kids off, right? Like, it's very important. I think having families is important. That's one of the problems I see within content creators. The problem that Asmongold's going to have, that many others are going to have, that they're not having families. There's going to be a check that comes due at some point, and it's going to suck for those people. But that's their choice, right? Everybody should, I'm not going to bemoan them that. But if you're ever like, oh, should I have kids? Like, well, like, if you're married, like, yeah, I think you probably should. Like, if you're thinking, if you have enough of an inkling to ask that question, I think you got to start to think about what's life going to be like in 30 and 40 years. And then when you have one, have a couple, just so that they have somebody that, they can share in how crazy mom and dad were, right?
Leveling roulette mains who spend the entire expansion leveling classes that they will have no use for at max level? roleplay mains who don't even do any content at all and spend their sub money dancing at player-made clubs? Look, I'm not trying.
Yeah.
Yeah, who cares?
Because the truth is that these guys are having more fun playing the game than you are. Unironically,
clearly.
the best server to play on is Moonguard. Moonguard feels more like World of Warcraft than any other server. Straight up. So yeah, they're having more fun playing the game. You're wrong about this? Well, here's another reason why I'm right. Is because with the nightclubs and these type of social environments, they are much more resistant to content droughts.
Yep.
So for example, if the new raid takes longer to come out, it doesn't really matter because people are already caught up doing their own events and their own content that's external of the game's release structure.
Clubs? Look, I'm not trying to shit on those kinds of people, but if that's who the game is targeting, then why even bother making high-end raids? Why even bother adding new classes to the game?
Well, why even bother doing anything if there are some people that aren't going to do it? It's like
To add on to that though, it's that the like that's where when I see people like say the hardcore and the casual are versus each other, they're symbiotic, right? Like you make hardcore content and then it advertises the game, and then what that does is somebody who might be into that, or maybe they don't know they are, just seeing that ends up becoming that goal, right? And that's where the one thing we don't see is the casuals having a direct impact on the rating scene. And that's where, it comes back down to no real player driven economy. Like the resources are always locked and higher, so there's no real demand for like copper, right? But if that demand always existed, you could go out and enjoy and provide copper, and that is helping somebody beat the raid. Like that simple equation. It could be 1 million copper is needed as opposed to, then less than 100,000 silver, like whatever that conversion rate is. You have that constant demand. We don't have that in 14, and thus the casual player, the hardcore player doesn't feel the benefit of the casual players out there kind of doing a lot of that monotonous grinding for them. And so you don't have a true symbiotic relationship off of that, those environments. But there's not enough hardcore players to support the game financially, so you need that casual players. You need both, right? And I think that's one of the points that Lynx is missing in this case.
It's like going to a restaurant and saying, why even bother having anything else on the menu except for what I like to eat? Well, it's because there are some people that like that. That's why they have ultimates. Now, our ultimates, like, for example, ultimate raids are basically like hard mode Belshazzar is really fucking hard, right? Like, it's insanely hard. Thamine is fucking ridiculous. It's insanely difficult. And guess what? Lost Ark is built around that. Lost Ark, the primary focus in Lost Ark is challenging group PvE content. That is what most people do in that game. It is not that much of a social game. It is not that much of a sandbox game. It is a raid simulator. That's what it does. And that's great because that's what the game's made for. But there are new islands that come out that are casual islands. There's it's Mokoko Island, and you get the Mokoko hammer, and you kill the rabbit with the hammer, and it's a golden rabbit. It explodes. You get 10 gold. Oh my God, right?
I don't care.
And like these are all
like,
nice.
Let's go.
So there are things that are added, like for example, like Wendy's adds salads every once in a while. I remember they made the Asiago
feels like I'm talking
salad,
to Chris.
and I was like, why?
Let's have a
would
food
you do
analogy
this?
in right now.
Don't you know that I'm the only person that goes to Wendy's? I'm never gonna eat this. Why would you make this
Wendy's,
salad
man.
if I don't want it? Well, it's because I go there with my dad, and then he gets it instead. A successful MMO is an MMO that knows exactly what it is, and it caters to a handful of groups of people without trying to make the entire
Everyone,
game
not going
for everybody.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah,
I think that's what Raft
Agreed.
did.
Why even bother with anything but the MSQ? The point I'm trying to make is that on top of catering to the cat moms, the leveling roulette mains, and RP enjoyers, the game used to cater to everyone.
Yeah, I know
it used
also,
to
man.
cater to the high-end raid enjoyers who wanted in-depth class design to master and theorize how to maximize on a
ARR,
fight-by-fight
dude. What a
basis.
freaking
It
good
used
time.
to cater to the
I know
mid-core,
people talk bad about
semi-invested
it.
players who wanted a goal to
get it.
chase with relic weapons. It used to cater to people who actually wanted a game to get invested in and master. On top of the new players, the casuals, and Twitter spamming Graha Tia Sims. But it's not that way anymore. and I just don't know who the target audience is for this game. I don't know if Square Enix just wants you to simply play the patch by coming back once every 4 months to complete all the new content in 4 hours and go, oh, that was cool, I guess. And
Well,
then
that is kind of what they said to do, to be fair. But
Who is the game for? I feel like, I don't know, man. Am I crazy that whenever I see a UI bar that is 3 by, what is this?
It's like 10,
3 by
12?
12, that's 36 buttons on the screen. With like, how many buffs does he have up right now? What is this? This is like, he's got over 10 buffs up. And some of these buffs matter a lot. Like, for example, like this is a shield wall, or not a shield wall, this is a 20% damage reduction. And I think this is also, this is like his damage cooldown as well. And then the boss also has a debuff on it. This is this here. It reduces its damage done. So there are, yeah, Rampart. That's this one here. And I feel like this is extremely complex.
log out for 4 more months. It doesn't seem that way with how slow the gearing up process takes, or the hooks they have to
6
keep
years
you
ago?
resubbing
Okay.
with things like the auto demolition timer for housing, where you can't take a break longer than 45 days. But if they want us to continue playing week after week, paying our monthly $15 entry fee, then why are they removing all of the interest and challenge for players who do spend a large amount of time playing the game? I don't subscribe to
I think that, again, is one of the smallest communities, though, right? In terms of just percentage of the overall. I could be wrong, but I mean, I don't think I am.
the idea that making every
Well, I don't think that. I mean, like, I don't know. I feel like they didn't. I mean, yeah, they added like 2 ultimate fights, right? They added the Dragon Song reprise or whatever, and then they added the Omega Protocol. Like, they added 2 ultimate fights. I mean, like, it would be probably nice if they added some mid-core, like, I don't know, something like they said, like Bajja was kind of like that. I never played it. I'm not sure.
Bajja was
But, like,
great.
yeah, it would be good if they had added that. I don't know why they didn't. But otherwise,
So we didn't have a crystal, sorry, deep dungeon in Shadowbringers. People wanted that, so they decided. So the team. So from a development perspective, as a developer, this tells me that the team that made like Bojja and Zadnor is the team they shifted over for the deep dungeon. It might not be 1-to-1, but ultimately, like, from a resource allocation, I think that the reason why we didn't have both, because we did have a Eureka and a deep dungeon, before we did have some of these things. So it's that I think human resources. I think them saying they're going to spare no expense is a good sign, but that phrase, I was like, I don't think it pays off for a couple years. And so what we'll be really telling is, will 7.0 have both a deep dungeon and some kind of exploration zone, which I think, and I would love for them to lean more into the Eureka stuff. And that would be exciting for me as a player.
yeah. They should have a Bajja, though? Yeah, sure.
everything easier and simpler ends up keeping new players invested for longer. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think expanding the available content, keeping a high skill ceiling for players to master, and constantly creating unique encounters to genuinely challenge your gameplay ability gives players a reason to play the game more than the required 4 hours a patch. I used to think that all the simplification to class design would mean players would have an easier time getting better at the game so they could tackle harder content, but as I'm sure all of you know, even in FF's easiest state of all time, people in roulettes are still terrible at their classes. People in Party Finder groups are
gotta
still
fix humanity,
floor-
man.
I don't know why he's upset about this, bro. Haven't you seen the classic WoW fucking compilations? They've got 3 buttons and they hit the wrong one. And this game came out 20 years ago. They still can't figure it out.
Yeah.
Because they're stupid. That's why.
magnets that do 1 DPS. And again, I'm not trying to shit on these people. My point is that if someone doesn't have an interest in taking that step into the world of playing well and learning to optimize, then they just won't.
Yeah, they
No
won't.
amount
Exactly.
of simplification, homogenization, and dumbing down or deletion
I find, and not this is going to be a solution for everybody, but data ends up being a huge aspect of that. My wife is this kind of player. She wants me to parse. And so that way she can see how she's doing and if she is improving. And that in and of itself, the fact that the game shies away from that, and I'm not advocating for a real-time DPS meter. I'm advocating for clearing the content, or at the end of the content, win or lose, it gives you your stats. I don't care about anybody else's stats. How am I doing? Pull over pull, run over run. Give me some information. Give me that info so that all of a sudden it might invite the player to ask the question, could I do better? Could I do that faster? And so you have to gamify the game, and there is a massive resistance for them doing that. And that's a frustration that I continue to carry.
Of systems is going to make Johnny Two Fingers become a good player.
I actually think this is a very good point that he's making. I think he's right about this. What he's saying here is that you can't just make the game easier and then expect people that aren't Mythic Raiders to start raiding Mythic.
Yeah.
Because it's a total mentality change. It's like a completely different idea. It's like, oh, well, maybe if we make the lettuce the same color as a steak, people that like eating steaks will eat salads. Probably not. It's just a completely different, everything about it is massively different. So yeah, and this is what WoW did, is WoW saw not enough people were doing raids, so they tried to make the raids easier. They were like, oh, well, there's LFR, there's like an easier version of it, etc. And like, there are just some people that aren't interested or compelled to do that kind of content. And if they want to, they'll do it.
Just makes the game less interesting and fun for those of us who want to spend a little more time on the game and get a little more invested. And this is the crux of everything I've said.
Like, I got a lot of criticism for actually supporting the WoD prune of abilities. Like, I'll say this again. Razer as a company has their, like, I think one of the biggest reasons why Razer is as big as it is now is because Mists of Pandaria was so fucking complicated. There was so much shit in that game that you had to buy a Razer Naga in order to play Arena. It was fucking insane. There was like, how many buttons and fucking different types of, like shift modifiers, control modifiers. It's nuts. How many of you guys bought an MMO mouse around Mists of Pandaria?
I didn't around that time, but I do have one if I can move.
I feel like, yeah, me. There's a lot of fucking people. There you go. That's too much. Too many buttons. Probably not according to Razer. Razer probably thought it was great. However, it's too many buttons for average player. And I've said before, I think Mists of Pandaria was actually bad for class design. Because everybody had everything, and there were 3 of them. It was massively bloated. There was too much of everything. And I think Legion was 1,000 times better for every single class. Legion played so much better than Mists of Pandaria. And it had less buttons. MOP was homogenization. Yes. Class design in Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria, Blizzard's idea of class design in those 2 expansions were giving the classes that don't have a button from another class. That's all they did. They said the best class design, in my opinion. Classes are way more fun, especially in PvP. What I'm saying is like they were only fun for people that are sitting here reminiscing on a video game that came out 10 years ago. And what I mean by that is that they were only fun for people that were hyper invested in the game. Yeah, it was fun for super try-hard players, but not for an average person.
The path Final Fantasy XIV has been going down does not tangibly improve the game for new players, because eventually they too will become veterans and reach a point where there is no more challenge or interest in the game for them. This game that I gave 12,000 hours of...
No, there's never going to be a point. Like, all you have to do is present the option, and the people that want to will take it, and the people that don't want to will just simply not take it. They're never going to take it. You're not going to convince them to take it. They're not going to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to just start raiding Mythic now. It's not going to happen.
My life too, and 6 years of enjoyment has taken away everything I once enjoyed about it.
Well,
I just want the game I once loved to...
See, that's one of the things that like brings into a bigger conversation about MMO preservation, because there isn't a way to play ARR or Heaven's Word or Stormblood or Shadowbringers. Like, the game is Endwalker, right? And so you don't have that ability. And same thing, the problems that we end up seeing within the Final Fantasy 11 world. I mean, it's like that's the solution, is that players make private servers that have these different versions, so you can go relive that nostalgia trip. 14 does not offer that as a service, but we saw what happened with WoW. Eventually they made a classic version of WoW, a progression version of that, that system. And, who knows, maybe Final Fantasy will do that too. That might be interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you want to see something like that.
Be good again. It has been in the past, and I desperately hope it will be in the future. Thanks for watching.
I wonder how he would feel about this if he started playing the game
everyone.
Today, for example. Because I always wonder whenever I hear comments like this, how much of your feelings about this are an outcome of the actual state of the game versus how much of them are an outcome of you playing the game for a long time and having a different opinion about it. But I do think that it's an issue. It's like an existential problem for a lot of MMOs, that they have a content delivery method that players kind of lose interest in. And I think MMOs thrive on kind of having that it factor, that now factor, that, sense of excitement of not knowing what to expect, like what's going to happen. And as soon as they become formulaic, I think that a lot of people do lose interest in them. And it's a problem that I think Lost Ark, Final Fantasy, and WoW are all three running into. And I think people said in chat, Destiny 2 has this issue as well.
I think New World will also have the same issue if they lean more and more into the theme park, which is attractive and it does bring in more players. But I think in the long run, you want that sand park, you want that theme park and that sandbox, and you want to marry them so it ends up, in a way, not like trying to appease everybody, but you just kind of different kinds of players, right? Like you got your sandbox, and then you have some asynchronous multiplayer, going and gathering copper and making it, that's what I do. I like to go just relax at the end of the day and gather some copper, hang out with some friends, and then I sell that on the market, and then the raiders get to go refine that into whatever, and that's how I always kind of view it. It's obviously probably a pipe dream, but that's why I'm glad New World has that those aspects, and I'm hopeful see what we see with Throne and Liberty. I'm hopeful to see what we see with Blue Protocol next year. Like I think 2024 is going to be pretty great, but Throne and Liberty Blue Protocol could I think there is some sandbox elements that we see with Throne and Liberty. I think that also ties into PvP. And then bigger MMOs like PAX Day and who knows with Ashes of Creation when that or will that. But I also just stepped into Star Citizen, which is a real treat. We're going to be playing some more of that. I still need to go finish 16. All this boils down to is I just don't have time. I wish I had more time to hang out with you guys and play games and make videos, but that is going to be something that maybe will come with enough time, But for the time being, I thank you so much for spending time with me today on that. I think I'll let Asmon finish it off, and then we'll wrap up with final thoughts.
So it's very hard to know how to solve this. I think this is something that, like, the MMO that solves this problem will be the next big MMO. Because nobody knows what it is.
That's that goes right into, like, people don't, there's a feeling of what people want, but the technology or the development or the money or the finance, there's all these moving parts, hasn't been able to capitalize on that. So we're all kind of just sitting here waiting and hoping, and wishing and praying. And anyway.
Final Fantasy's classes are super formulaic and homogenized. Well, I don't know yet. I think that one of the only good points that he brought up here, actually not one of the only, it's his opinion, right? It's whatever. But I think one of the main points that he brought up that I think was very good is that he said that you're not going to just make a game easier and make things simpler and convince casual players to start being hardcore players. They are just simply two fundamentally different groups of people. It's like it doesn't matter how long you put a dog in the water, it's never going to turn into a fish. It's just never going to happen. There's a video right there. I think it's pretty good. What do you guys think? Yeah, a couple million. Yeah, do it for a couple million years and then maybe it would work.
Well, guys, that is the conclusion of the series here. I hope you got some enjoyment out of it. Thanks so much for hanging out throughout this time, especially if you came in with the first video and you made it all the way to video number 4. Tip of the hat. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And if you guys have other React videos that you want me to react to, you can always sound off below or hit me up on Discord. That is essentially kind of the policy. And this won't become, at least not my intention, to become the norm. But it is a good way of having these discussions. And yeah, that's going to be it. Thanks so much for your time today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that link in the description for the Instagram. And if you want to see more videos from me, which I cover a lot of different games, guides, and more, click the subscribe button. It would be fantastic to have you. And then if you want to venture into the bold world of my dark comedy, that is always an option as well. Thank you guys for being here. Love you faces. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. And until then, take care.